Hello, everyone. This is my presentation on Religio Medici. On this cover page, I have the initial engraved title page that was used not only for the unauthorized publication, but for later publications as well. So the first thing, just the text as an object, I got a picture here of a nicely bound copy of Religio Medici that obviously this doesn't go back to the 1642 edition, but it does show a nicely bound one. The thing about this book is that it was, it was printed 8 times just within Brown's lifetime, 8 or 9, and there's a lot of surviving copies, and some of them are, survived because they were bound really nicely, like this one. There's other ones that were quickly stitched together, and you're going to get fragments and that kind of thing. It was an octavo format, 6-inch pages, but pretty large type, so it would have been pretty legible, small little book that a person could easily still read. Quite simple design. It has the engraved title page and then just the one initial letter that had the design. Otherwise, really pretty simple. No marginalia, no, introductory letters or any of the usual material that we're used to seeing in a lot of these texts. No dedication. It just has the title page and then it begins. And the copies of the books are actually quite plentiful. The 1642 edition alone, on North America, there's 14 copies. There's, I think, about 8 or 9 copies in the British Isles. And if you're curious, the closest one for us here in South Dakota is in Chicago. So we can maybe road trip in a couple weeks here. Context. The publication history is quite complex. So you have manuscripts that are circulating prior to the unauthorized edition. We don't have any of the autograph manuscripts, but we do have 8 partial or fully copied manuscripts by other people's hands. And then you have the unauthorized edition in 1642, and then you have the beginning of the authorized editions in the next year, 1643. So this often dominates the scholarly discussion because it's kind of a complex history there. Some other things to think about is that the Church of England since 1580 is Calvinist, which means the theology of predestination, drawn from Luther's concept of grace being God alone. Calvinist updates that and says if grace is from God alone, then we are predestined to be saved or not saved. Sometimes people refer to this as double predestination, Lutheranism as single predestination. But anyway, the main reason this theology matters is because it was the main thread holding together at the time the sort of Presbyterian sect, which was wanted less control by the actual clergy, and also wanted more congregational control, but also wanted a less ornate liturgy and didn't want it to resemble so much the Catholic Church. The Episcopalian sect was also known as the High Church. This still used much more of the Catholic liturgy and also had the hierarchical of bishops for control of the church. And so this is happening, and this comes to one of the main tensions that happens between the Puritan faith and the kind of more high church faith, is that King Charles, of course, marries a Catholic, and this further ignites this sort of distrust, and the English Civil War starts in 1642, the same year that the unauthorized publication takes place. And the text is, by all means, an instant bestseller. John Aubrey says that reading it as a contemporary in 1642 changes his life. And readers of very different religious backgrounds, right? We got this tension going on with the English Civil War, but everyone from Catholics to Quakers in some context will lay claim to enjoying this text. And as I will show you, some who don't enjoy the text. So the instant reaction to contemporaneous pieces that are really interesting. First, the Sir Kenelm Digby, it's actually the picture, the lower one there. I'm not going to read these whole quotes, but basically what Digby argues is that he likes the style and kind of the poetic voice, and he likes the more moderate tone. He's not as zealous, Brown being. So Ross, on the other hand, likes nothing. He was an interesting personality at the time, and he basically takes this quote that I have here. He takes a moment in which Brown argues that he doesn't feel the need to call the Pope the Antichrist, which was a common sort of Protestant talking point in the 16th and 17th century. Because he doesn't want to call the Pope the Antichrist, somehow Ross takes from that he is embracing wholly the Catholic faith. So that was 17th century critics. The actual scholarship on this has especially focused on early reactions to Religio Medici, such as the Digby or the Ross piece, and also unpacking this complex publication history I mentioned earlier. Catherine Murphy, for example, uses a recent diary of a London intellectual and influencer, Samuel Hartlib, to actually trace the early manuscripts, and from tracing that early circulation of manuscripts, she's able to argue that Brown likely actually didn't publish the unauthorized edition. Earlier scholars thought, well, maybe he just put it out there and didn't want to put his name to it, but she pretty convincingly shows that that's pretty unlikely. And then Matthew Augustine, in a recent text, looks at Religio Medici, why there's some 20th century scholars who were so dismissive of it as being overly conservative or overly problematic, and he looks at how contemporaries at the time and how they would have read this text, that it was actually more revolutionary and more politically engaged than some 20th century scholars have allowed. So that brings me to my critical crux. The most recent scholarship has been largely dominated by Reed Barber, and he takes up this question of genre. What is Religio Medici? And what he argues is that it's an aphoristic writing tradition. So these are small blurbs meant to entice and make us think, but not meant to be a cohesive argument. And his evidence for this largely comes from the editorial changes that happen between the manuscripts, the unauthorized edition, and eventually the authorized edition. So I'll be focusing especially my own research on the changes between the unauthorized edition and the authorized edition. So just some examples. In the 1642 edition, the paragraphs are extremely long. Just as an example, the second paragraph lasts approximately 5 pages, and it only has 2 basic headers. There's no marginalia notes, and the basic header is Religio Medici, and then eventually, about 2/3 of the way, there's another header that says Part 2. In that 1643 edition, you have much shorter paragraphs. So for example, that second paragraph that was a single paragraph, in this one is 4.5 paragraphs total. And Part 1 is broken up into 58 sections. They're just marked section in the marginalia. And Part 2 includes 16 sections. So all total, each section comprises 2 1/3 page, keeping in mind that these pages are pretty small. So they're fairly small sections. So just as an example of this, if you look at the bottom of page 6 here, you have Brown talking about the sort of the revolutions and the reformations that were taking place. And he says that between the two extremes, referring to types of revolutions that can take place, between these two extremes, their affection and opinion may with the same hope expect a union of the poles of heaven. But to differentiate myself nearer and draw unto the lesser circle, there is no church whose every part, then he goes on to say that the Church of England is where he feels he belongs. But you'll see right here, it's just a semicolon with the word but. Okay, it's part of a sentence. But if we look at the authorized edition now, that word but actually becomes a brand new section and a brand new paragraph. And so this reads very differently. In the authorized edition, section 4 is his overview of reformations and how they happen in general. And then the next section, he's going to talk about his personal allegiance to the Church of England. And that changes how we read that editorial change makes these ideas, they're obviously related, but it makes them more connected than what Brown's edition does. So my working thesis here is that a closer review of both current scholarship and contemporaneous reactions to Religio Medici reveals that many readers struggle with how to define this text genre or fully appreciate its rhetorical mode. However, a closer analysis of the publication history of Religio Medici and some major themes on religion reveals that the text fosters a dialogic reading. It appreciates nuance, offers convergent ideas, and proposes thought experiments rather than a coherent argument of religious theology. Ultimately, this essay will expand upon Reed Barber's commentary concerning the aphoristic genre that seems closely aligned with Religio Medici, by arguing not only that the text creates a dialogic rhetorical mode, but that this mode partially explains the diverse reactions to the text. So what I plan on doing with the essay to deal with the dialogic nature of it is to give a bit of definitions from Bakhtin, the 20th century theorist on the dialogic novel. But I'm also going to look at some more contemporary to Brown, the Michel de Montaigne, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but the early genre of essays and how they operated not as this sort of the way we think of it as a cohesive argument like we're trying to write, but more a playground of ideas to sort of deal with and get them out there. Charles Cotton, interestingly, writes in the translation of Michel there, this idea that each publication that he had a new impression and then he would add something to them, right? So you're not rewriting it, you're adding more impressions. And I think this works well with the content. So I think the form and the content of Brown can actually kind of match here more than we realize. So remember, he argues, I am now content to understand a mystery without rigid definition in an easy and platonic description. And I think that speaks to that dialogic nature. So these are the few of the questions I have. I'm worried about going over time, so I'll let you kind of look over those. How to correctly title or how to correctly do in-text citations when there's not a specific page. You're just looking at that information from WorldCat or the English Short Title Catalog. Any passages that struck you as contradictory that maybe I could look at, and also how much time to actually spend defining dialogic. I'm really concerned about getting through all this material in the time, the allotted number of words. So I will post a updated works cited page that's easier to view in our discussion board, so you can look at that a little bit more clearly. All right, thanks everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all hopefully in the fall semester.